The 19th century was a time of conquest, a time when flags were planted, borders drawn, and entire peoples erased from the pages of power. Africa, rich in kingdoms, cultures, and civilizations, was being consumed by Europe's insatiable hunger. This was the era of the Scramble for Africa. At the infamous Berlin Conference of 1884, the rulers of Europe sat at a table, cutting Africa into pieces. Not a single African was present. It was not diplomacy, it was division. Greed made official. Britain, France, Belgium, Germany, Portugal, and a young and hungry Italy joined the race. In their eyes, Africa wasn't sovereign, it was spoil. But nestled in the highlands of East Africa, there stood a kingdom with a history longer than most European nations, Ethiopia. Not yet colonized, not yet broken, Ethiopia was not a blank space waiting to be claimed. It was a nation of kings and queens, faith and resistance, a country that traced its roots back to Aksum, a powerful empire that once rivaled Rome. It had coins, trade routes, and stone churches carved from the very earth. Its people practiced Christianity, older than most in Europe. They spoke Ge'ez, Amharic, Tigrinya, and Oromo. They lived in mountain fortresses and fertile valleys, and they had seen foreign armies before, Arabs, Turks, Egyptians, and pushed them back. But now, a new force approached, armed with maps, muskets, and the myth of superiority. And leading Ethiopia at this crucial moment was a man named Menelik. Menelik II, crowned Emperor of Ethiopia in 1889, was no ordinary ruler. He was a master diplomat, a military tactician, and a modernizer. He played rival European powers against one another, buying rifles from Russia, cannons from France, and telegraph cables from Britain. But more importantly, he united Ethiopia's fractured kingdoms. For centuries, Ethiopian emperors had ruled from the north. The southern provinces remained autonomous or rebellious. Menelik changed that. Through battle, diplomacy, and marriage, he brought the Oromos, Tigrayans, Amaras, Sidamas, and others under one imperial banner, and beside him stood a formidable force in her own right, Empress Taytu Betul. Taytu was fierce, educated, and politically astute. She spoke multiple languages and believed no foreigner should dictate Ethiopia's fate. Together, they forged a kingdom ready to defend itself, not just with swords, but with strategy. In 1889, Italy approached Ethiopia with what appeared to be a gesture of friendship, a treaty called the Treaty of Wuchale. On the surface, it seemed harmless. Article 17 offered Italy's diplomatic support and promised mutual peace, but there was a catch. In Amharic, the Ethiopian version said Menelik may use Italy's support in dealing with foreign powers. In Italian, it stated that Menelik must conduct all foreign affairs through Italy. In other words, Italy claimed Ethiopia had become a protectorate, a colony in all but name. Menelik was outraged. This was not what he had agreed to. He renounced the treaty. He warned the world that Ethiopia was not for sale, and he began to prepare for war. In Rome, the Italian government was humiliated. Their dreams of empire were slipping away, so they doubled down. By 1895, Italy had stationed over 15,000 troops in its colony of Eritrea, directly north of Ethiopia. They believed Ethiopia would crumble under pressure. Their commander, General Oreste Baratieri, underestimated his enemy. He thought Ethiopia was primitive. He thought Menelik couldn't possibly unite his people. He thought wrong. Menelik wasn't just preparing an army, he was preparing a nation. He called upon regional rulers, clergy, nobles, and commoners. He told them, "Our enemies have advanced. If we stand together, we shall win." Ethiopians, Christian, Muslim, and traditional believers answered the call. By the end of 1895, Menelik had gathered over 100,000 warriors, many armed with modern rifles, cannons, and unmatched knowledge of the terrain. The spirit of unity had become a weapon more powerful than any gun. As winter turned to spring, two armies began to move. The Italians advanced from Eritrea, confident, well-fed, and European-trained. But they were far from home, unfamiliar with the rugged Ethiopian highlands, and low on supplies. Ethiopia's armies were organized in 3 massive columns, commanded by Menelik himself, along with generals like Ras Alula, Ras Mikael, and Ras Makonnen, father of the future Emperor Haile Selassie. Behind them moved wagons of grain, pack mules, and thousands of camp followers. And beside Menelik, Empress Taytu led her own contingent of 5,000 troops and commanded logistics. These weren't just soldiers, they were farmers, monks, mothers and fathers defending their homeland. They marched with ancient chants, church blessings, and burning resolve. Italy had rifles, but Ethiopia had a reason to fight. March 1st, 1896. The sun rose over the rugged peaks of Adwa, bathing the battlefield in gold and blood. The Italian commander, General Baratieri, had made a fatal mistake. He split his forces into 3 columns, hoping to outflank Menelik under cover of night. But the Ethiopian scouts had already mapped their movements. Menelik's troops were in position. Before dawn, the hills echoed with war chants, shouts, and the sound of drums. Ethiopian warriors surged forward, on foot and horseback, armed with swords, spears, and rifles. The terrain was unforgiving. Steep ravines, sharp rocks, and thick bush choked the Italian advance. The 3 Italian columns quickly lost contact with one another. They were isolated and vulnerable. The Ethiopian attack was coordinated, ferocious, and relentless. By midday, the battlefield was littered with the bodies of Italian soldiers. By afternoon, the Italian army was in shambles. Over 7,000 Italian soldiers were killed, thousands more surrendered. Entire battalions ceased to exist. Many Eritrean colonial troops, forced to fight against their African kin, laid down their arms or switched sides. General Baratieri barely escaped with his life. His officers were captured, his army shattered, and the world watched in disbelief. It was the first time in modern history that an African army had defeated a European colonial power. The myth of European invincibility had been broken by strategy, by unity, and by the unyielding will of the Ethiopian people. The victory wasn't just military, it was spiritual. Adwa became a symbol, a flame. News of the defeat spread like wildfire. In Rome, riots erupted. The Prime Minister resigned. Italy fell into political crisis. The Treaty of Wuchal was scrapped. A new one, the Treaty of Addis Ababa, was signed, recognizing Ethiopia's full sovereignty. In Africa, the message was clear. Colonial powers could be challenged. In the Caribbean, in Harlem, and in London, black intellectuals, poets, and freedom fighters celebrated the victory. W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, and others pointed to Adwa as proof that Africa had the power to stand tall. Ethiopia became more than a country. It became a symbol of resistance, a beacon for the oppressed. And Adwa, a mountain town few Europeans had heard of, became the site of one of Africa's greatest triumphs. The Battle of Adwa was not just a victory for Ethiopia, it was a message to the world. A message that Africa is not passive, that unity is power, that dignity is worth fighting for. Menelik II returned to his capital as a hero, but more importantly, he returned as a symbol of what African leadership could achieve. Empress Taytu's name became legend, proof that women had always been central to resistance and nation-building. For decades to come, Adwa would echo across history. From the anti-colonial struggles of Ghana, Kenya, and Algeria, to the civil rights movements in the United States, to liberation chants in the streets of South Africa, the cry of Adwa lived on. We will not be conquered. In Ethiopia today, Adwa Day is celebrated every year on March 1st. It is more than a holiday, it is a legacy. A reminder to every young Ethiopian and every African that their ancestors did not kneel before empire. They stood, they fought, and they won. So the next time someone tells you Africa was conquered, Tell them about Adwa. Tell them about the unity, the courage, the fire. Tell them about how a mountain became a fortress and how a nation refused to bow. This was the story of Adwa. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories from history. Because the past shapes the future, and stories like these deserve to be heard.